Without further ado, I just want to welcome Eamon McAnaney, class of '87. Thanks so much for being here today.
Here we're going to talk about sort of how I got there, how I got to be, as Bill pointed out, the voice of lacrosse and get a chance to do play-by-play for nationally televised broadcasts, mainly of college lacrosse, but by the end, college football and college basketball. And even though I think broadcasting and the television industry is probably a little bit different than what most of you are used to, and a lot of careers out there, it's still based on networking and making contacts. Obviously, like anything, it doesn't hurt to know people. I remember interviewing one player who was getting ready to, go into the real world, and he gave me a quote. So this is not original, but he was writing down a number a mutual friend that we had, and a number that might help him. And he says, "Life is a contact sport, so you better make contacts." And I thought it was interesting that here I was about probably 35 or 40, learning something from a 21-year-old senior, but to Eamon Walsh's credit, he went to Cornell, the young man who told me that, so I definitely wrote it down and remembered it. But so I think that's sort of why we're here, and through a different way than maybe what some of you are used to, just how networking and contacts can help in all industries. But I'm going to give you fair warning. This is kind of going to be a winding road, because that's the way my professional career has been. I've stopped off at many exits that I wasn't planning on taking, and it's gotten to me here to the ultimate goal, which is to be on air in New York City, which when I said I wanted to be on TV, that was my goal. So in a very winding path, I've made it to my goal, and sort of started afresh here in my career. But it certainly didn't start that way, because when I got out of Notre Dame, I didn't have a whole lot of that dreaded word experience. And when I'm taking it all the way back to the Hill School back in when I got there in 1983 and graduated in 1987, there weren't opportunities in broadcasting like I can imagine now there might be. We had maybe a radio station, but there was obviously no such thing called the internet. So there was no one doing web streams of the Hill-Lawrenceville football game back in 1987. And even if there was, I was supposedly playing in those games, because I played 3 sports at the Hill, as we all were supposed to, and then I went on, as Bill mentioned, to play lacrosse at Notre Dame. So you don't have the free time to put together a reel that you need to go into broadcasting. So when I got out of Notre Dame, I didn't really have the experience that you're looking for. You hear about some of these broadcasters who knew what they wanted to do. So even on their own, they would go to games back in the day with their own tape recorder and sit in the top deck and do the play-by-play to themselves into their tape recorder. Well, that wasn't me. I was playing games and I was practicing, so I didn't have a whole lot of free time, but I knew I wanted to work in sports. How I was going to work in sports, I had no idea, but I sent out a flood of cover letters with resumes, and I got a flood of rejection letters back. But I tell you, boy, did that stationery look great. When you get a rejection letter from the Chicago Bears or the New York Yankees or CBS Sports, it looks good. I collected some great stationery, but they all said, "We have nothing for you at this time." So, like I said, I knew I wanted to work in sports, and I have an uncle who was big into sailing and knew people with the International Olympic Committee because of his sailing connection. So he had a mutual friend who ran a sports marketing and agency firm. So I got an internship with him right out of college. As I'm sure we all know, internship equals no money. So I had something on my resume, and I had a place to go to during the day to work a job, and it was sports. So that was my first real job out of college. And then my sister knew someone. My sister worked with a girl whose boyfriend worked at CBS Sports, and he got me a job as a scorer for their NFL Today Sunday NFL coverage. So score was basically you just kept stats and track of a game, so that if there was a 75-yard touchdown pass, as soon as the person who was the anchor who was doing the cut-in said, "How long was that pass?" you knew 75 yards, and you knew it was Walsh to Pringle, touchdown Bengals. You had to be the information guy. So I had that job, and through that job, I got to know someone who hooked me up with ABC Sports, so I did something similar on Saturday. So through all my connections, I had 3 jobs. I was working 7 days a week, and I was bringing home about $50. But I was off and running, so I had now maybe more obviously than money. I had experience, and I had 3 jobs put on my resume. And then there was one more connection now that allowed me to cash a chip, because my head coach at Notre Dame, his brother, was an established producer at ESPN. So now that I had experience, I could go to an interview, and he could put in my resume, and he got me an interview in Bristol, Connecticut at ESPN for a job called production assistant. Now, for once, this was a job interview that even I couldn't screw up because it was only about sports. All they wanted to know was, did you know sports and how much did you know? Every question. Who's going to win Rookie of the Year? Who's going to win the Campbell Conference? That's what the West used to be in the NHL. Who's going to win the Vezina Trophy, best goalie? They thought you didn't know hockey, so that was the trick. What are the strengths and weaknesses of every team in the AFC Central? Ask my mom about all the money she spent on education at the Hill School in Notre Dame, and this is the job interview I get, talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. But it worked. I had a job. Now, the first thing they told me was when they called me up and offered me the job was, if you want to be on air, this is not the job for you because this has nothing to do with being on air. I'm like, look, I have to get out of the house. I just need a job. I'll take whatever it is. So it was a job, production assistant in Bristol, Connecticut, making about $18,000 a year, but you were working at ESPN, which is if you love sports, there's no other place to work. But even though they told me it had nothing to do with being on air, here I was getting a chance to watch and learn and see how they worked from the greatest studio hosts you can ever imagine. Chris Berman, John Saunders, Dan Patrick, Bob Lee. You got to work hand in hand with them, and you saw how they prepared for a show, how they did a show, and that's all I wanted to do. I watched it even more, and I said, that's what I want to do. How am I going to get there? So after about 3 years, one of the breaks or fate, they launched a second network called ESPN2. And ESPN2, they had these updates that were based in Bristol, Connecticut. But they didn't do it all the time. There was a lot of downtime in between the updates. So I got to know a director very well, and she let me do a mock broadcast during one of their downtimes. So I was able to finally get a tape to be on air. And then I sent that tape all across the country. Let's see, I wrote down some of the places. Missoula, Montana, Grand Junction, Colorado, Davenport, Iowa, just to name a few. And once again, they weren't as nice looking as the rejection letters from the Chicago Bears and the Chicago Bulls, but it was the same thing. Radio silence for months. Then finally my phone rang. Phone at home. They didn't have cell phones back in those days, just so you know, so you had to wait hope the answering machine didn't run out of tape. But I got a call from the general manager for a TV station in Odessa, Texas. And he liked my tape, and he wanted to know if I was still interested in the weekend sports anchor job. I told him yes, and he told me it paid $15,000. I said, did I say yes already? Now, at this point at ESPN, I'd been promoted. I was established. I was now an associate producer. I was making what you would call determine a livable wage. And if you've ever read the book or seen the movie Friday Night Lights, that's based on Odessa, Texas. And if you've ever read the book or seen the movie or the TV show, it doesn't exactly portray Odessa, Texas in the greatest of light. So I was getting nervous. I'm like, do I really want to throw this all away that I've established at ESPN over years to go on air in Odessa, Texas? Really, I was chickening out. That's flat out to be the truth. To be honest, I was scared of what if I change careers, go to the middle of nowhere. As a New Yorker, Odessa, Texas is the middle of nowhere. I don't want to offend anyone from the state of Texas. And what if I'm not good? What if I'm not as good as I think I am? So flat out, I chickened out. I called the guy back in Odessa, and I said, look, I'm staying at ESPN. So I stayed at ESPN for another year or two, and then this new network in New York launched called Classic Sports Network. And at the time, very many, as would happen when sports ventures would launch, they would turn to ESPN to hire new people because they knew ESPN people, for the most part, always had one eye on the exit because ESPN was in Bristol, Connecticut, and worked you to death, and people were always trying for something new. And so this was a chance for me to come back to New York and still work in sports television. I was very interested. I interviewed. And because it was so new, and I at this point had been at ESPN for about 5 years, to them, I was established. And they made me a nice offer, and it was a job back here in New York, so I had to take it. Of course, I'd already said yes when I told my dad what I was going to do, and he said, I really hope you know what you're doing because I've never heard of Classic Sports Network. So he sent me there with some confidence in his backing, but, it was, Dad, I'm moving home too, by the way. Did I tell you that much? But one of the best things about Classic Sports Network, I met my wife there, but that's not the point here. That's a side story. But I finally, for the first time now, had weekends off. And one of my former coworkers at ESPN, a gentleman by the name of Brian DiNovellis, was now the sports director for a small cable station in northern New Jersey. And we started talking and reconnecting, and he's like, I need reporters on the weekends. Are you have any interest? You sure you haven't given up on air work? I can get you work, and you can get a tape together, and you can still do that if you can work on Saturdays and Sundays. And I'm like, sure, I'll do it. What does it pay? $25 a story. All right, we'll do that. We'll give up our weekends for $25 a story. Of course, when I missed the last bus to New York after covering a Friday night football game and had to take a cab back that cost me $75, it probably didn't help too well on the family budget. But I was getting a tape. I was covering sports again. And then Classic Sports Network, as luck would have it, a few years in, was bought by ESPN. So I had to make a decision. Do I go back to ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut, or do I take the buyout package and see what's up and see what we can do? And my girlfriend, now my wife at the time, had no interest in going to Bristol, Connecticut. I knew that. So that was one strike against going back to Bristol, Connecticut. But I also knew I just didn't really want to do that. So I turned 30 and had no job. But as fate would have it, my friend Brian DiNovellis, who got me the job in the first place working on the weekends, snapped his Achilles tendon playing basketball and could not go to work, could not drive, could not go to work, so he needed to fill in for at least a month. So even though I didn't have a full-time job, I now had a chance to be an anchor, which is what I wanted to do, to sit at a desk. And this was the big break, not literally because he snapped his Achilles tendon, but fortunately. So I got a chance 5 days a week to be a sports anchor, to cut the highlights, to write the shows, to banter with the weathermen, and really to put together a tape. So now I was getting a more established tape, and I was getting better, which is the other good thing, actually. You actually have to improve. So then I felt good enough that I could send my tape out. Still now, I didn't have enough experience to go straight to New York or Boston or Philly. I knew it was going to be a small market, but I didn't exactly think it would be Bangor, Maine, which is where I finally got a call. And it was an interesting story because when I was done filling in for Brian in New Jersey, I was still freelancing, doing some production work, which is where most of my experience was. And through some of the connections I'd made at Classic Sports Network, many of those people, when Classic Sports Network moved up to Bristol, moved to Major League Baseball Productions, which was located here in New York City. So through knowing them, they told me about a job that was opening at their company that I was interested in. So on my way to the interview for that job in Chelsea Market, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, an area code I didn't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. So I sat down and had the job interview with Major League Baseball. They talked about the job. No firm offer was made, but it looked like it was really my job to turn down. And I said I would get back to them. And then as I left Chelsea Market, I checked the answering machine, or checked my message on the phone. And it was the general manager from the ABC affiliate in Bangor, Maine, offering me a chance to be the weekend anchor and weekday reporter. Again, what I wanted. Just like Odessa, Texas, what I wanted, a chance to be on air. But I was now a little bit older, and I had this girlfriend who I knew basically was going to, I hadn't even proposed yet, but I knew this was where we were going to go, and I knew if she wasn't going to go to Bristol, Connecticut, I was definitely not going to go to Bangor, Maine. So it wasn't an easy decision, and I remember, never forget, having a conversation with my father. And my father was an attorney. I thought he would talk some sense into me. I thought he would say, you can't go at this point in your life, go work for $16,000 or $18,000 a year. I basically wanted him to tell me what to do. And he did the exact opposite. He said, this is what you've always wanted to do. This is what you've always talked about. If you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? I'm like, all right, so we're going to do it. So I loaded up my car, drove 9 hours, maybe 10 hours to Bangor, Maine, and left New York all behind for this job as a weekend anchor. And Bangor, Maine, far away, and it's cold. But I got exactly what I wanted to do. I got the experience, and I was established, and I was covering sports, and they had a great hockey team, so we were busy. So I was getting reps, and I felt like I was getting better. But again, I was by myself in Bangor, Maine. So as luck would have it, it all goes back to who you know maybe sometimes. My same friend, Brian DiNovellis, back in New Jersey, about 6 to 8 months while I was in Bangor, Maine, got a new job. So that he moved on to a place called News 12 New Jersey, which created a job in northern New Jersey. So I applied for it, and I got it. I was able to come back and be on air in northern New Jersey. It was right on the other side of the George Washington Bridge, so I was able to live in New York and commute, and everything was working out great. Wasn't great money. I wasn't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but I could pay the bills, and I was covering sports in New York, and I was meeting people, and I was making contacts, so I felt like I was on my way. until that station got bought up by Time Warner Cable and went away. So now here we are again at crossroads of having really no future, the job, having to find another job. And what am I going to do? How am I going to do that? So I started to freelance across around the New York area. There are these stations called News 12 New Jersey, News 12 Brooklyn, News 12 Westchester, and that's where I got jobs on the weekend. But I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off, just trying to get any job because I lost my main full-time job. But it was also at this point that there was NBA TV, which was in Secaucus, New Jersey. And one of my contacts who I had met when I was in production at Classic Sports Network was a gentleman named Rich Kopelnick, who ran NBA TV now. He'd moved back to NBA TV and was hiring the talent. So there's a fine line, I think we all know, between annoyance and keeping in touch. How often do you call someone about a job? How many times do you follow up? How frequently do you follow up? It's a very, how far do you go before you become an annoyance? Well, I don't know if I did it right, but I tried to space it out. But again, as luck would have it, I called him to follow up on a day where someone quit. Someone the night before didn't like the job. He quit, and I called in and said, "Hey, Rich, do you think you need anyone? I'm right here in New Jersey. I know I call you all the time. Just wondering, how, what's going on." He's like, "Actually, I do need someone. Can you come in for an audition?" So I came in for an audition. They liked me. I got the job, and I was in TV nirvana for me because I was finally at a place that was paying okay. It was established on TV. My mom and dad could see it. Everyone could see it. It was on TV, and it was the NBA. I was covering pro sports. And now, because I was on NBA TV covering the NBA, one of my best friends in life, who was a producer at Turner, who I worked with at ESPN, felt that he could sell me to his bosses to cover the playoffs. So I got a chance to cover the playoffs as a field reporter. So I had gone in the span of about 4 months from really no prospects at all and wondering what was going to go on to being able to cover the playoffs. And, oh, by the way, now I'm interviewing Kobe Bryant live after he just hit a buzzer beater. So, again, it was quite a turn there. But all these jobs were temporary. They were, the playoffs was a month. NBA TV was a freelance basis. So I never really had a flag planted in the ground. I was running all over the place. And while I was getting experience and I was getting reps and I was meeting people, I wasn't establishing myself. Who was I? What was my identity? But I did learn at this point in my career a quick lesson and something I live by in television and probably everything. Eliminate the word no from your vocabulary. As in, are you available on Christmas? Are you available on Thanksgiving? Do you know anything about water polo? Have you ever done baseball play-by-play? What's your wrestling knowledge? You cannot say, I found out that in television, and if you ever, because I also did hiring, so if I said, are you available on Thanksgiving? And you said no, well, the next time I need someone, I'm going to remember, well, that's the guy who said no. I'm going to call 3 other people first. So I said yes to practically any job I was offered. And that, again, I called water polo. I have no idea how I did it. I hope they burned the tapes. But that was something I lived by in broadcasting. So, but unfortunately, like I said, nothing was full-time. And at this point, I had become married, and we had a son, Declan, and I couldn't run around and chase every job. It just wasn't fair anymore to do that, and I wasn't making enough money. And so I thought about getting out of TV and getting into finance. I'm sure there are many more people here who can tell me what finance means because I still have no idea, but I wanted to get into finance. So, through Lacrosse, through my uncles, through various connections, I had a few job interviews. I got a chance to meet people, and I'll never forget, I had a chance to go to spend a day at UBS. And I met this man who was very good friends with my uncle, and he was giving me a speech sort of about his career and what catapulted his career. He was in a similar spot in his life 20 years earlier. He said, failure was not an option. I had to succeed because it was no longer about me, and I had to find something that I had a passion and a drive for. And I'm like, wait, that's right. That's what I have for sports broadcasting, not this. I don't know this. And then I met another person there that same day who said, all right, if we hire you, we can start you at 40 and you'll have to work nights and weekends because that's when you make your clients. I'm like, wait, that's what I'm doing now. So why do I want to give up what I know for something brand new? So I begged my wife for one more shot at sports broadcasting, and that's when it all started to turn because all of a sudden now there were two college networks, College Sports Television, and then ESPNU. And ESPNU launching was the big break of my career because they had all these random sports that a lot of people didn't want to televise or broadcast, including lacrosse. So I banged on their door figuratively with the phone calls, and I said, look, I know lacrosse, I know television, I can be an asset. I kept calling them, and then they called me back once. They said, all right, Eamon, we got a job for you. You're going to call Army Harvard Wrestling at West Point. I'm like, I'm going to call what? Yeah, we got to have you do wrestling, and then if we like how you do that job, we'll send you some lacrosse assignments. I'm like, all right. So I'm going up to Army to call wrestling. I knew nothing about wrestling. I mean, again, if Randy Macho Man Savage and Hulk Hogan showed up, maybe I could have called him. But legitimate wrestling, I knew nothing. But Harvard did have this one wrestler. He was a heavyweight. He had moved to the United States from Africa. He was a 4.9 student in about 7 majors, spoke about 7 different languages, was the best heavyweight wrestler in the country. I had more stuff on this one guy. I had done all my research, and I knew about this much about him and about this much about any other wrestler. So I could not wait for this guy to take the mat. So Harvard shows up, pulls up at West Point. They start getting off the bus, and here comes this large human being with his arm in a sling. And I'm like, what happened to that guy? Oh, that's our best wrestler. He's our heavyweight, but he separated his shoulder last night at Lehigh. He's not wrestling. So all that information I had was out the window. So, but we made it through, and we got to do lacrosse. And I was off and running. I was finally getting a chance to work games. But again, it wasn't every day. It was still temporary. It was still by assignment basis, by call basis. So I was still working the phones to get other work. I was still driving around the tri-state area to get work with News 12 New Jersey. And now there was a new network in New York called Sportsnet New York. The Mets own the network, and they launched it. And I thought, this is going to be great. They need a bunch of people. Who better than a guy who's a native New Yorker, who's been on air in New York for the last 5 years? I'm going to be perfect for them. Well, they went with the exact opposite philosophy to start off. They hired people who knew nothing about New York and had never been here before. So I missed out there. But I could tell as I was watching them, I'm like, they're going to need new people because these people just don't know anything about New York. But again, it was another connection. Someone who I was a production assistant with at ESPN had become the news director at SNY. So again, I would periodically call them and email them and see if there's anything. Do you need anything? Are there any opportunities? Here's my latest tape. I'm covering this. And again, one day I called them right when they were unhappy with one of their workers, or one of their on-air talent was unhappy there and moved on. Perfect timing. They called me in for an interview, and they said, here's how we want you to start. We do this segment, which is basically a crossfire debate segment where you and this guy, Mark, are going to debate for about 2 or 3 minutes, but we can't pay you a whole lot. But if we like you, we might be able to use you for other shows, but we want to bring you in on a one-night basis, and we can't pay you a whole lot, but we want you, to see how you work and see what the chemistry is, but we can't pay you a lot. I'm like, I heard that part. That part I heard 3 times. And trust, I'm like, so I went home, and I'm like, on my way home, I'm like, what do they really mean by can't pay you a lot? I mean, it's New York City. I mean, come on, they can't pay me peanuts. Oh. They weren't lying. They did not pay us a lot to do that segment, but I was on TV in New York, and once I had my foot in the door at SNY, and they saw my resume and all that I had done in New York, in the New York area, they started using me more. And now I had a career. I was doing play-by-play on the weekends, and I was filling in on SNY in New York on a freelance temporary basis. So I felt established. I was doing sideline reporting for college football, and I was doing college lacrosse play-by-play. I started doing that in about 2007, and my one goal there when I started calling college lacrosse was I want to call the national championship game. That's the time when everyone watches lacrosse, but for some reason they just didn't feel that either I wasn't big enough for that assignment or they wanted to try some other people. I remember in 2010 they brought in Sean McDonough, so I don't know if any of you are familiar with Sean's work, but he called the World Series for CBS. He now calls Monday Night Football. And I'm like, well, if they're going to give Sean McDonough lacrosse, I'm never going to get this. But luckily then I got my chance. 2012, I had become their main lacrosse announcer for the regular season, and they gave me a chance to call the national championship. And that's obviously a career highlight. To call the national championship game of a sport I played in high school and a sport I played in college. And I thought it really helped me separate from other play-by-play announcers because most play-by-play announcers never played that sport at that level. So I thought that was something that made me stick out, and that helped me because I had such command of lacrosse. I was able to call it with so much confidence, I thought, that then they were able to trust me with college football. So all of a sudden now, not only am I doing college lacrosse, I'm doing Big Ten football games. Here I am getting a chance to call games Wisconsin at Northwestern, Northwestern at Iowa. So all that, sort of hard work and winding path through all those, side jobs and jobs, covering CYO basketball. Once I remember I got one assignment that said, Eamon, are you available on Saturday? Back to my original plan where you don't say no. I said yes. All right. Then I got my assignment. You're going to meet a camera crew at 7 in the morning. You're going to drive to Staten Island and you're going to cover a CYO basketball tournament. I'm like, whatever that means, I'll show up. And well, clicked in at about 9 in the morning when I saw the team come out of the tunnel that I was being paid to cover third graders play basketball. So trust me, I have various stories about what I've covered to get to where I am now. But at the end of the day, when I got to call that national championship game in 2012 and the next 5, it was worth it. I got to accomplish my goal of being the voice of lacrosse and calling the national championship game. And I thought I would do that, forever or for as long as they would have me. But then last December, SNY here in New York came to me with a job offer for a full-time job here in New York. Their caveat was you can't work for anyone else. So if you come here, that's it. You're going to work for us. And it came at a perfect time for me because the traveling was taking its toll. I have 2 sons who are 11 and 9 playing their own games, and I never get to see them on the weekends. And this was a chance, I thought, to sort of get established in New York City, which is my home, which is what I always wanted to do, and spend more time with my family. I thought it was a win-win, and as great as play-by-play is and was, and as great as it was to get to call college football, the traveling 4 days a weekend wasn't worth it. So I took the job offer, and I started in January, and now I'm a full-time anchor reporter here in New York for Sportsnet New York, and it's worked out great. I have a 15-minute commute to work. I don't have to leave. I'm still here in Manhattan. And the way our schedules work on Saturdays and Sundays, we do the night shows, so I can go in at 5, and I get a chance to see my son's games or, whatever they have on tap that weekend. So it's really worked out. But the fact of the matter is, as much as I've had to go, sort of an indirect route to get there, the contacts and the networks that I've made at all these different jobs, whether it was production, on air, water polo, basketball, they all help, and they can all be counted on later on in life, and you never know who they're going to know. So the bottom line is, as much as I'd love to tell you I'm here because of hard work and knowledge and creativity and great writing ability, that's all true. But it's definitely also because of networks and who you know, and whether they think they can trust you or not, or whether they know your work ethic, and whether they think you can handle the assignment. So it's been a long journey. It's been, like I said, a winding road, but certainly right now, as I'm about to turn 49, I've accomplished my goal. I mean, I'm not settling by any stretch of the imagination, but to be on air in New York was the goal when I started out, and that's what I've been able to accomplish, and that's where I am right now.
Cool.
Anybody have a brief question or two for him? I know I do, but I will let those ask if you have any questions for him.
Do you regret not going to Texas?
I think about it often, but I then tell myself you can't play the what if Back to the Future game because I never would have met my wife. But if I were at a broadcasting camp or seminar and someone asked me what I should have done, I should have taken the job.
How much do they try to squash your personal feelings, like when you're on air? Like, I mean, when you're covering Notre Dame and you want to blurt things out or you want to personally invest yourself, like how much are they trying to keep your personal inflections under control?
Are you insinuating that when I call Duke Notre Dame lacrosse, I'm a Notre Dame homer? I mean, come on. I think I'm straight and narrow.
I think you're pretty pretty good about not letting your personal feelings get in there.
Here's the interesting thing about broadcasting, which I find frustrating and yet tough to figure out. In most businesses, you're judged by your performance. I mean, and I would think. I mean, sports broadcasting for the most part is the only thing I worked in. But if you're in sales or, I mean, you have something to point to. I'm responsible for us improving in this, or I sold more widgets than Bobby. In broadcasting, it's really very objective. Someone likes you. Someone likes the way you deliver a call. Someone thinks you're slanted. Someone thinks you're over the top. Someone thinks they like your enthusiasm. So I've been told two separate things by the same people. One person said, well, I like the fact that you're different. You have a New York edge to you. You almost have a talk radio edge to you. You're not that straight, narrow Switzerland type play-by-play announcer by the book. And then sometimes when I say, oh, okay, they like that, they say, well, bring it back, tone it back a notch. You know, we don't need so much opinion or passion. So I have been told over the years that maybe I need to dial it back and just sort of be more the play-by-play guy, the true play-by-play guy, sort of Switzerland. You know, Johnson to Malone, touchdown.
Yeah.
I'm not. It's just not who I am. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. And yes, in lacrosse it gets me in trouble because even though I could criticize the officials or be slanted or go have an opinion in a Johns Hopkins Maryland game, if I have that same opinion in a Notre Dame game, everyone thinks it's because I'm a Notre Dame grad. So they tell me I can't do that in Notre Dame games, and I didn't listen. Yes, Wilson.
Well, who inspires you from a play-by-play? You've been doing this forever. You must know everyone.
Yeah, I think Mike Breen, who calls the NBA championships for ESPN, called the Knicks forever, which still does, which is where I got to see him the most. I think is a great role model. I think Joe Buck, even though I know he does so much now that some people, kind of get sick of him, but I think he's a great announcer as far as the ability to make it a big moment and bring it back. Those are two guys who I watch. I mean, obviously Al Michaels I think is the best, but I think Mike Breen is the guy who when I watch and I say, well, I'd like to be like that guy. Yes.
What's the hardest name you've had to pronounce?
Yeah. Syracuse had a goalie named Dominic Lamalinara. And lacrosse moves pretty quickly, and the goalie makes a save. So it's not like you're like, save, because you can't say save Syracuse. You have to say the goalie's name. So that was always, for 4 years, all of us who worked together struggled with that name. And I finally met his dad once, and I said, how are we supposed to say it? And he told me Lamalinara, because forever we saw it said Lamalinara or whatever. We all came out of different ways. So I said, I'm going with this. His dad told me this is how I'm going to say it, but it was definitely, I don't know if we ever really got it right. Yes.
Curious in your thoughts on how you feel that the content and the broadcasting of sports is going to evolve, especially as TV sort of moves to internet and sort of I guess all these networks started online and then came to TV, and it seems a lot of them are now going back to online. But obviously sports are still going to be played. There's still going to be a Super Bowl, but now it's not. There's NFL on Twitter and so on and so forth. So I'm curious, as someone who's been in the industry, where do you see it going over the next 5-10 years?
Well, interestingly enough, if that's the right phrase, it's going away from the career move I just made. Because as you pointed out, the games are always going to be played.
Right.
So someone's always going to have to broadcast the games. And whether you want to watch it on your phone, you watch it on Twitter, or, whether your school, the league, someone is going to broadcast the game. So that's not going away. But what you see now is that these networks are no longer juggernauts. I mean, ESPN has had 2 massive layoffs in the last 2 years. And when I started, not even when I started there, 10 years ago, no one would ever think that ESPN would have to lay off people. ESPN basically printed money for a variety of reasons. Some would say it's the reason why Disney bought Cap Cities was because of ESPN. But now, because of the access to stuff, I was just telling Paul here, the sports industry is in a strange spot here because sports used to run cable. If you were not interested in sports and you looked at your cable bill, you would hate it because that's why it was whatever it was. It was because no matter what city you lived in, let's just take New York, for example. That cable company had to pay to show the Yankees, they had to pay to show the Knicks, had to pay to show the Mets, the Rangers, and of course ESPN. So if all you wanted to do was watch Housewives of Atlanta on Bravo or Game of Thrones on HBO, you're paying about $200 for everything because of sports. Well, now you don't have to. You can get HBO Go, you can get Bravo on demand. Whatever, you can cord cut. So I think where they decided to cut is the studio. which is what I just moved back into. So I think it's going to be more games, but less around the games. So like less studio shows, less packaging around the games. But I still think if you just want to watch the game, you're gonna be able to watch it somehow. It'll be on.
So then what, just as a follow-up, what's ESPN's game plan? Because their whole business was based upon all of the, not just the game, but the NFL lives of
Right.
every sport out there and all the analysis. But if you can now watch a highlight anywhere and they're going to cut back on that content, what are they going to do?
Well, right now it's based on having two people yell at each other as loud as they can. I mean, that's all they show. And I hate to be a hypocrite because I certainly have done that. And if someone will offer me a paycheck, I'll do it in 10 minutes. So but I don't think a network can be built on it from 10 a.m. to, they just launched a new sports center at 6 o'clock and they try to make it hip. I mean, also, I'll be honest, at 49, I'm no one's demographic, so I get this right now. But they launched this new show, and I'm like, it's more talking. I'm like, they've been talking all day. I mean, I don't think they have figured it out, though, and that's the problem. And I don't think anyone has, because Fox Sports 1 isn't cutting through either. Yes?
You said that the lacrosse championships were a big goal for you in terms of just defining career moment. Do you have another that you kind of have in mind as you take the next steps forward in your career?
I haven't. I just want to get more established at SNY and try to sort of find a way to become their guy at 10:30. It wasn't promised to me when I took the job, but I think right now SNY is just sort of a carousel of anchors. There's no real shifts, no identity. I just sort of want to now take this opportunity to hammer my identity in New York sports and just say, okay, this is what I am. I'm not the lacrosse guy anymore. I'm not going out to Tulsa to call a college football game that no one's going to watch. I just sort of want to, plant a flag here in New York and sort of convince SNY that I should be their number one host. Yes.
When I'm watching a game and it says live, is there a delay?
Yes.
What's the delay?
Depends.
Okay.
Well,
Depending
also
on
now.
who's talking or depending on what?
What's that?
Depending on who's.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the amount of money they put into the production of the sport. And also nowadays with satellite, like if you live in a New York City apartment building, you can hear people cheering 3 different times because you have cable, you have satellite, and then you, I forget the third, but it's just, things just happen at different times. Like satellite is much more delayed than a regular broadcast on network TV. But they do delay it now because their microphones are so close to the action. Like if you ever watch a college lacrosse game, there's no ambient sound because there's probably only 2,000 or 3,000 people in a game. So the mics are so close, they pick up everything.
Mm-hmm.
So before we paid for the delay, it got us in a lot of trouble because you could hear everything. Whereas in an NFL game, there's 80,000 people screaming their head off. So when Bill Parcells, well, that's the dated reference. So when Bill Belichick is yelling at the refs, you don't hear the words he's saying. You can see the lips or whatever, but you're not hearing it. In lacrosse, you hear it, so they put in a delay. So now the audio drops out instead of you hearing every word. And now they do that across the board.
What about your show now? What's the delay of your show?
I don't believe there's any delay.
Oh, there is. So you're live.
We're live.
They say the people that do it live are the real professionals.
Well, I was wondering why Bill didn't bring my teleprompter here and made me sort of do it off the cuff here. I'm not used to having to talk without my script in front of me, but yeah. No, we do it live. Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to meet us.
Feel free. I know